go ahead and get started. Oops. There we go.
Okay, first thing we thought maybe we would discuss a little bit is what you need when you get ready to start going bird watching. So Jen, if you want to click it. One thing you want to try to do when you get started is get some quality optics. And most of the time I get, lots of questions about what kind of binoculars to buy and different things like that. And, to be honest, the best thing you can do is try to budget how much you want to spend on something like this, because you can get a pair of binoculars for under $100, or you can get some that are $3,000. There is a lot of difference between those two ends of the spectrum, but there's a lot of quality things that are sort of in the middle of that. And if you really want to be interested in this and think this is something you're going to do for your lifetime, you may want to try to get something that's a little bit more expensive than something that's $100 or $200 or something. So you need something like that, because what happens is you'll end up disappointing yourself. Sometimes you won't get very good looks at things or whatever. So quality optics are something that I always tell people, that try to get the best that you think you can afford. And also a suggestion there is to go to maybe a vendor, Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops. There's other places that you can go and actually put a pair of binoculars in your hands. Most of them have several different brands, and then you can actually see what they feel like. There's nothing more disappointing than ordering something online that you've never handled or whatever, and you get it and you think, well, this doesn't feel good, or doesn't fit my hands well, or something like that. So that's one of the things I always try to let people know, that if you can, or if you go out with other people and they may have binoculars and they, say, hey, can I look through these or whatever, and try to do something like that. Another thing that we always talk about is try to get a quality field guide or two. There's different types, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So you want to get something that will help you identify what you are seeing. And also you'll want to try to visit quality habitat. That may be your backyard, if you let it go wild a little bit, or you've got bushes and trees and things like that, or have bird feeders out or something, you can start in your backyard. But then you'll tend to want to go out to other locations. So we have a lot of quality habitats in Kansas, whether it be prairies or woodlands in the eastern part of the state, for the most part, for woodlands. We have lots of marshes in Kansas, so those are quite easily available to go out and try. Something else we want to consider is having a quality mentor. If you want to try to get a bit of a jump on things, rather than just going out and doing things by yourself, find someone that you may know, or you want to meet, or something that is pretty good at birding, and then maybe try to spend some time with them. One thing we do also talk a lot about is patience. Sometimes people tend to want to rush through things, or I know when I started, I always wanted to try to find that next thing. And what happens when you do that is you sort of miss some of the things that, this cardinal that's up. It's a cardinal. Most people know this bird, but you may not know, how it feeds or what it does during the day, or whatever the case may be. So if you have a little bit of patience and want to try to follow something like that around, you'll end up learning more about the species that you're trying to look. And the last one, obviously, we put that there for emphasis: practice. The more you go out, the more you look, the better you'll get at it. So. Next slide, Jen.
Yeah. So getting into the quality optics.
Okay. One of the things, if you're going to bird, I bird a lot of lakes, reservoirs, marshes, things like that. So spotting scopes are a good thing to have on hand. Again, it's like binoculars. You can get spotting scopes for fairly inexpensive ones. $100 or so, you can get a scope, and you can, like I said, you can spend $5,000 on a spotting scope. I suggest obviously something in between, but they come in exceptionally handy when you're looking at birds that are far away. It can be frustrating to go somewhere like Cheyenne Bottoms or Quivira example, where the birds are a long ways away and you don't have a spotting scope. You can use window mounts. The one we have depicted there has a tripod. You'll need to get that type of equipment to go along with your scope in order to be able to use that. But anyway, like it's mentioned, you can those can really be an asset when you're trying to identify things that are at a distance. Binoculars. There's the photos up there depict several different types or styles of binoculars. The photo that's in the center there that has the several different kinds, those are the old school binoculars that maybe your parents might have had or something like that. Those are called poral prism. That was the type of binoculars that we had at the time. They were functional at the time, but the technology has gotten so much better that some of the things that you see on the photograph on the right, those are called roof prism. Those are the two different kinds of binoculars that we have. And roof prisms, you look through them straight. In the poral prisms, there's a mirror inside of the housing of the binoculars that the light or the image bounces off of. But most people now are getting roof prism binoculars. And I would recommend not getting anything smaller than like a 7x35. I don't think, okay, the one on the very top right, that's a small, like 6 or 7 power and probably a 25 or 24. And like I said, if you get the expensive brands of those, they're okay. But typically, if you get something like this, that's pretty cheap and small like that, you're going to be more frustrated because the smaller of the exit pupil there, it lets in less light. So that way what you're looking at doesn't illuminate that well. So again, my suggestions that I have here, 10x50s are about as large as you want to get typically, unless you're using them to look at the stars or the sky. Otherwise, they're hard to keep still in your hands. And again, like I had mentioned, but get the best that you can afford, try them out for comfort, and then also go ahead and read reviews of them. You may have a favorite company that you like if, for example, if you use a Nikon camera, you may want to look at Nikon for the brand. Vortex is a very common and very popular brand right now because of the warranty that they have. So anyway, there's several different kinds, and what you want to do is go out and try those out.
So, and if you have lots of money to spend, they're actually coming up with technology and have it already available that the binoculars will ID the birds for you, which is pretty amazing, but also very expensive.
A question came up in the chat about if there are places that loan binoculars out. Sometimes nature centers can do that. We have a couple of programs with our own agency, the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, that we have binoculars that are there for the participants in those events to use. But that would be the place. I know Mandy is on here. Do you guys loan binoculars out at the Wetlands Education Center at Shine Bottoms?
So I do know too that Audubon of Kansas has started a program through libraries, and so they're launching in specific libraries first, but that'll be something where folks can go to their local library in the future and check out a pair of binoculars.
Yeah, they're doing that as what they call their backpack program. I believe they started in Southwest Kansas. I believe Hugoton's Public Library, which would be west of Liberal. They kind of started down there, and they want to put them in pretty much every public library in the state if they can acquire funding for that. So, and that would be something like Jen mentioned that you can go out and check out from the library. I think there's at least one pair of adult and maybe one pair of kids binoculars in those. So anyway, that's kind of what they're trying to do for that. Next slide. Okay, I mentioned about field guides. Field guide publication has been a pretty lucrative business. There are several different kinds that you can get. Some of them are photographs, some of them are artist renderings or paintings of things within the books themselves. Two of the ones that I like to use are the Kaufman Field Guide. Ken Kaufman is a pretty famous field guide author, and he actually has ties to Wichita, Kansas. I think he was born in Ohio, but his family moved to Kansas when he was young. So he spent his formative years in Wichita through his teenage years, and now he's become an accomplished bird watcher, field guide author, and that type of thing. The Sibley Guide is one that we use as well. That's a fairly, within the last 10 or 12 years or so, I think Sibley Guides have been fairly popular. Again, look at several styles, see what fits your needs the best, and then obviously look and buy the best that you can afford with that as well. The Kaufman Guide's around $15 or so. The Sibley Guide's probably twice that. There's the other photograph that Jen popped up, has a few more examples, and there's a lot of field guides. You know, if you've got a local bookstore, you can actually go and have them in your hands to look at. I know if you buy things from Amazon, a lot of those will have that function where you can thumb through a particular book or field guide or something. She's also showing the app on her phone there as well. There's a Sibley app, which is associated with the field guide book. Audubon has an app. It depends. The Audubon app, I know I downloaded that for free. I don't know if there's a charge with it now. The Sibley app is one that costs a little bit, but you can go to your apps. Yeah, you can go to your app stores on your phones and then find some of that kind of thing.
I think Sibley is a $20 or $25 one-time fee, and then you've got the whole thing, including sounds.
Yeah, the Audubon guide also has sounds associated with it, so you can thumb through, you can pick the species, and then you can see life history information about the birds. Obviously on a phone, the pictures of the birds or the artist renderings are not that big, so you may want to, actually, I'm old, so I like books and that kind of thing. I do use the apps on the phone basically for sounds and stuff, but and also don't get just one. There's, sometimes, the bird that you're looking at in the field isn't going to look exactly like it did in the book. The ones that have artist renderings or paintings, those are trying to give you what that bird will probably look like, or point out some field marks. Ones that are photograph guides, that's one bird at one moment in time. So that bird may look like what you're looking at, or it may not quite look quite right or something. So anyway, check several of them out, and then you can kind of see what you're most comfortable with. And again, talk to your mentors or your peers or something if you're going out with people, and maybe see what kind of field guides they like or use.
So we generally, if you're really getting into wanting to identify birds and learn that, I recommend doing the rendition, because like Mike said, it's going to be kind of an average of what most of these birds should look like instead of that one particular bird. So people can get hung up on pictures of actual birds if it doesn't look exactly the same. So it's important to know how the rendition style goes.
Got another, there you go. That's an example of the inside plates or drawings or paintings in the inside of the Sibley Guide. They will have functions like the one on the lower left that popped up, shows you different parts of the bird. So if someone asks you, okay, did it have a mallard stripe? Okay, you can look and you can see what a mallard stripe is, or does it have an eye ring? Or what did the upper tail coverts look like? So what you want to do is you want to try to make yourself familiar with those guides before you go out into the field. You got it at night, or you got a time when you're not bird watching or whatever, sit down and crack one of these things open and just, go ahead and look through it.
Yeah, and we highly recommend actually reading the descriptions and not just looking at the pictures. Because they're going to give you some important information. You'll notice too that the maps are color coded, and this has to do with the differences between if a species stays year round or maybe it's migratory. So when it's expected and where, range maps are super important. Birds can't fly, and we do have things that show up that are really kind of strange or rare sometimes, but it is important to be familiar with those parts of the field guide as well.
Next slide. Okay, like we talked about, quality habitat is important. You can pull birds to your yard if it's a fairly, highly manicured location or something like that. Birds will sometimes pass through, or if you have bird feeders, they will stop. But typically they're looking for something that also provides places to hide for them, whether it be bushes or trees or things like that. Some people even go, to the effect of building a brush pile or whatever in their backyard. Try to put maybe a feeder maybe away from edges and stuff, because feral cats are one of the biggest problems that we have with bird loss in nature. And those, edges and things like that give cats places to hide and the opportunity to rush a feeder or something and try to catch stuff. So like I said, when you're first starting out, get familiar with the birds that are in your yard. And if you've got quality habitat there, or you may have a city or community park that has good habitat, then you can start to branch out some and go out. If there's a lake or reservoir around, it gives you an opportunity to see some different type of birds than you would probably see in your yard. And as we mentioned here, as your skills increase, so does your desire to visit these other habitats. I think the photo down on the lower left is one that was shot at Shimmerhorn Park, where Jennifer works. Really neat area, overlooks Shoal Creek, which is a sizable stream that flows all the time. So it has running water that birds need, and lots of great quality habitat around. Some of the other ones, you see forested habitats and edge habitat. The one in the right center is from a marsh area, so you'll get to see waterfowl, and this time of year you'll see things like sandhill cranes and gulls and different birds like that. So anyway, like I said, once you get familiar with stuff that's in your backyard, you're naturally, I think, going to want to go out and try to find some other habitats and some other birds and stuff to find. And also the last point that popped up, you want to visit these habitats at various times of the year. A lot of times we go out and we spend a lot of time in the field in the spring, usually from around April, May in that area, and then September, October. But there's a lot of things that can be seen in different times of the year. Obviously, right now we're getting sparrows that have nested in the north, and they spend the winter here. So we'll see some pictures of some things later that if you do visit some of these quality habitats at different times of the year, you're going to maximize the opportunity to see different types of birds, or maybe you'll see some of the birds that we have that maybe in a different plumage or something. Some birds change plumage from summer to winter, from breeding plumage to non-breeding, that type of thing.
So, and also sometimes you might be surprised at what you find at a location that you think maybe isn't the most birdie habitat. So this photo happens to be from a Christmas bird count where we were able to get a pretty close look at one of the snowy owls that came down.
All right, selection of good mentor. There are a lot of people that birdwatch now. It still remains one of the highest, what am I trying to say, Jennifer? It's one
wildlife
of the most,
viewing.
Yeah, wildlife viewing is still one of the most popular things about about wildlife viewing. Outdoor activities is still one of the fastest growing. There are lots of people that do that. There are various studies that came out recently that gave us numbers in that. I can't quote them right now, but it is still very popular. And again, like we mentioned here, your mentor doesn't have to be an expert, but it does help. You may want to pair with somebody or have a small group of friends or something like that go out and you go out and try to do that. Just like everything else, there are people that are very giving, very caring, care what that you're trying to start or learn, and take the time to be patient with you. And those are the people that make the best mentors. Just like in all other walks of life, there are people that are arrogant or maybe in a big hurry or don't have a lot of patience with people. Those are kind of the ones that maybe you want to shy away from if you're just beginning. And hopefully you don't turn into something like that once you're really adept at this, and you know that you started at some point. So your patience with someone that's just starting, once you're good at it, you can pass that on to the next person. Again, we mentioned try to pick up the good habits from these people and not necessarily the bad ones. There are people that may tend to, bend the rules as far as private property rights. there may be something that's interesting, but they don't have permission to be on the property. Those are things that you need to be cognizant of, and don't go on that property if it's not yours or if you don't have permission to do so. I mean, that's what good binoculars are for too. Most of the time you can see things from public roadways or in habitats that are publicly accessible, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But anyway, again, like we mentioned, try to pick up those good habits and try not to have the bad ones. And one of the most important things is you need to have fun. Most of us, there are a few exceptions. Most of us don't get paid to do this. So this is something, if you want to have it as a hobby, you need to have fun with it. And whether you like going out by yourself, it may be a release for you. If you've got a stressful job and it gives you an opportunity to go out and just, commune with nature, so to speak, you can do that. Or if it's an opportunity for you to go out and spend some time with some friends or something, that's what this is all about. Okay, like I've alluded to, there are times when you really need to be patient. You want to try to maybe learn more about what you're seeing. You can learn about, what each species may do. Again, go ahead and pop those up, Jen.
Yep, sorry, it's going a little slow occasionally.
That's okay. One of the points I want to pull out there in that sequence there is learn to let go. Sometimes you may see something, and to be honest, either you don't get a good enough look, or maybe you're not quite good enough at birding yet to really know what it is. It's okay to obsess about it to an extent, but don't let it ruin your day because you saw something and you thought it was something weird or whatever the case may be, and you couldn't figure it out. That's where you want to use some of the things that's mentioned there. Take notes, or you can journal, draw some a sketch of it, or write down some of the things that you're seeing. One thing I do want to dissuade people from, a lot of times I'll see beginners will go out and they'll start looking at a bird and automatically they grab their field guide and they start thumbing through it. Well, when you're spending the time doing that, the bird that you may be looking at may have flown away. So be sure and get a good look at it before you really start going through a field guide or something like that, or like we mentioned, using the apps on your phones or that kind of thing. Obviously, photos are a great help. There's a few people I know that it's kind of odd. They'll go out and they don't really birdwatch with binoculars, but they take photos and then they go back and they'll identify things later. That always seemed odd to me. I always wanted to kind of see what I was seeing at the time. And if I don't take very good photographs, the ones I take are ones to maybe document something that's strange or maybe something that was special. We'll see a few of my photos later here that we can talk about just a little bit, but.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember with cameras is that there's some distortion that takes place with colors, and especially if you're dealing with weird light conditions. And so sometimes you can misidentify a species by going strictly from your photo. So it's important to try and spend that time with the binoculars or looking at it with the naked eye.
Yeah, exactly.
And the important thing to remember too is you are dealing with wild animals and they don't always cooperate. So patience is kind of a must.
That's for sure. And again, I mentioned it and I'm going to reiterate it again. Practice is what's important and why it's important. Again, like we mentioned, the more time you spend doing it, the better you're going to get. For the most part, most people tend to get better, as they do things. It's just like golf or driving a car or anything else. Typically, the more you do something, the more you're going to get comfortable doing it. Learn to observe with not only your eyes, but also your ears. I know there's some people that are really dependent upon what they see. And I started out for whatever reason, and just because I'm wired weird, I suppose, but I always like to hear things and I try to identify that way as well. So a lot of times I can hear something that's singing or calling or whatever before I ever see it. And then, I know that frustrates some people to go out with somebody that does that. And I have to try to remember not to just blurt out what it is. For example, if I'm hearing it, I want to try to give people that I'm out with or whatever an opportunity to either find the things themselves or be able to do that. So the photo on the top right is one that I think Jenn was with me when I took that photo. That's a flock of snow geese that was at Webster Reservoir, be north and west of Hayes. And I don't know, obviously we were trying to do a Christmas bird count, but I don't know. Somebody tell me, how am I supposed to count that? That one was sort of tough. So what? Go ahead, Jen.
That is something we have to try and do, is figure out how to estimate some of those big numbers. That way we can, write down some information. Christmas bird counts like that are really important citizen science opportunities. So, trying to figure out how to estimate those large sizes is another thing that you can do with practice.
Yeah, those of us that work for wildlife agencies, we've had a little bit of training in that on estimating flock, counts and those sort of things. So, but that's something that, if I assigned a number to that, who's going to prove me right or wrong? So those are kind of tough. Another thing is that we popped up here is to join organizations that help provide those opportunities. The Kansas Ornithological Society is a great organization within our state that is involved in mostly bird watching. Audubon is another one. Audubon has a lot of great bird watching opportunities and things that they do, but they're a little bit more in the advocacy realm. So they're, advocating for, conservation practices and things that aren't necessarily just birds. So if you're interested in just birds, the Kansas Ornithological Society is a good place to try to start there. So.
And at the end, you'll have an opportunity to get my contact information, and I happen to be the current president of Kansas Ornithological Society. So if you don't know how to get through to that, definitely get in touch with me.
I know it's the end of the day.
All right. So when we're talking about trying to get better, we're looking at trying to go from, the birds in these photos are identifiable for someone that's practiced at it and kind of knows what's going on. But go ahead, Jen. Hope everybody can hear that, but some of the birds that you're listening to are sort of at a distance or that kind of thing. So we want to go from something like that,
which is basically seeing things from a distance, kind of hearing just bird noise.
I probably should have figured it out.
to maybe something like this.
So, and hopefully if you've had the time to practice, then you can start to pick out what these birds actually sound like. So if you're hearing it.
Hey, Sparrow, what's up? It's Chelsea downstairs. So David's trailer that's out here, I don't know if he's working still.
So, and Dad, you might let Chelsea know we can hear her.
Okay. Yeah, she's on the phone.
So another one that you might hear occasionally out in the wild, if I can get this to stay up, is our kestrel.
So I went ahead and moved it, and then I accidentally locked it. It is locked now, so now it's sitting in front of
So this one's hopefully one folks are familiar with, the American robin, especially early in the morning. And another really common one during the summertime in warm months, their migration is the indigo bunting here.
Okay, sorry about that. There was a question that came in over the chat about how accurate some of the apps are. And to be honest, they're pretty good. But there are some things I know that come in that just you need to be kind of aware of what's in your area before you actually get here. I'm going to have to mute again.
To continue with what he's discussing, the apps like Merlin app, which we didn't put any information on that because we're going to try and encourage people to start out learning that stuff first before they rely really heavily on an app to identify a song for you. But they do a pretty good job, but they still have quite a few errors. So Dad's a reviewer for eBird, and they pretty regularly get some Merlin recordings that identified it as something that it probably wasn't. And some of that has to do with user error as well. Those are heavily reliant on where you are in the world. So if you didn't turn on a location, it's going to pop up anything that sounds familiar instead of popping up what should be in that area. So
Okay.
we'll see.
Yeah.
Are you back?
Yep, I'm back now. Anyway, these are some of the birds that you may be able to come up with. Western Kansas, not the one on the bottom right. I don't know why Jen left that in there.
You had some context there, I'm sure. But
yeah, probably.
For those of us who take calls about identifying wildlife, especially over the phone or things like that, sometimes what people describe you goes along more like that one in the right bottom corner there. So you kind of wonder what they actually saw. Size is another thing. Our depth perception can really mess with us. And so some people say this bird was humongous and it's really not quite as big as they think it was.
Okay, now we're going to do a little bit of practice for people here. Sometimes people have difficulty with hawks. This is the time of year when we start getting an influx of other types of hawks that we maybe not necessarily see all year long. Anyway, can anybody either in the chat or unmute yourself or something, maybe try to say, maybe what we're looking at here? Not everybody at once. They are birds, yeah.
Sorry, that's a running joke with Mike and I. I'm not very good at bird ID at all. So
there, Emily's in the right track. Those are hawks. Well, we're actually looking at 4 different species. The one on the top left is the most common one that we have here, and that's a red-tailed hawk. It happens to be a young bird, so you'll notice that the tail's got some barring on it or something if you look at the underneath of it. The one just immediately to the right is called a ferruginous hawk. That is one that's found in the western third of the state for the most part. There's a few that wander, but typically they're found in the west. And if you'll look at it, can you see its legs? They actually are feathered all the way down to the feet. So that's the way you can tell a red-tailed hawk from a ferruginous hawk. The ferruginous hawks have the feathers down to the feet. The one on the bottom left is a different species called a Swainson's hawk. And that hawk is one that's found in Kansas in the summertime. They actually migrate in huge flocks. You'll see sometimes they'll follow tractors looking for insects and small mammals and things like that to catch when they're in migration. I've seen, fields that had several hundred in it. So they'll gather and they migrate in flocks, and they actually fly to Argentina. So those are ones that don't spend the winter here. There's a few that maybe winter in California and maybe on the Gulf Coast, but for the most part, that species flies to Argentina. They're a little bit smaller than red tails, And sometimes they're mistaken for, different types, different species or something. And then the one on the lower right, that's one that nests in the Arctic. That's called a rough-legged hawk. And rough-legged, meaning that the feathers go all the way down to the feet. So it's similar to the ferruginous hawk. But when they're on the sit like this, sometimes they're a little bit difficult to identify. So if Jen, you want to throw up the next slide, please.
Yep, it's coming.
So a lot of these are a lot easier to identify when they're flying. The one on the top right is obviously the red-tailed hawk. And Jen, if you want to move your cursor to show what's called the patagial bar.
And
There
it
you
should
go.
be top left, you mean?
I'm going to say top left, yes. Okay, so you'll see the dark little crescent there. And then if you move just to your right on that bird.
We'll get over here.
There you go. If you see black in that location on the bird's wings when it's flying, it's a red-tailed hawk. None of the other ones have that. If you'll notice the ferruginous hawk in flight just to the right doesn't have that. The Swainson's hawk that's at the bottom left doesn't have that. The rough-legged hawk obviously has those dark bases of the feathers on their primaries, so it doesn't have that either. So if you see that mark on the front of the wing like that on a hawk that's in flight, it's going to be a red-tailed hawk. Okay, go ahead.
So, and something else I'll point out too, there are books and ways that you can identify even from silhouette, which we'll get to shortly. But something else to watch is the behavior of these birds. So for instance, the rough-legged hawk down here at the bottom, they have a tendency to hover in flight, especially when they're hunting, but they do that a lot more regularly than the other species up here. So there are things like that once you get the feel and have watched some of these birds in the wild for a while, you might pick out some of those characteristics.
Staying in the hawk realm, there's a couple of species here that people often misidentify. The one on the right, I'm sorry, the one on the left is a Cooper's hawk. A little bit larger, a little bit bigger head. If you notice, the tail is a little bit more rounded on the edges. The one on the right is a sharp-shinned hawk. One thing that's different between these two is the Cooper's hawk on the left is actually an immature bird. The sharp-shinned on the right is actually an adult. So they'll look really similar when they're in the same plumage or the same age. But you look for some things like that smaller head and a squared-off tail on a sharp-shinned versus a Cooper's. And there's a little bit of size overlap. So anyway, things like this, the accipiters are a hard group. So that's one of the ones you want to take a lot of time to practice with if you see them. They're actually bird hunters. So you'll see both of these species, especially in fall and winter, that hang around your yard and try to catch birds around bird feeders and things like that.
So, and what color are the eyes of the adults?
Looks like it's red.
That's what it should be. The picture's not great, so I apologize.
Okay, I'm going to have to move along here. We're 20 minutes left here. Sometimes you'll see birds in silhouette. So there are different references where you can see some of these sort of things. Silhouettes of raptors in flight. There's several different places you can find things like that. If you're looking at the drawing on the left, the top one looks more like sort of like a black vulture or vulture type flight. The tail's a little bit weird on that. But anyway, the one in the middle is an accipiter. The bottom one is a falcon. And falcons are not as closely related to hawks as you might think. They're more closely related to parrots. So if you look at a kestrel's head, for example, to me, it looks like a souped up or a killer parakeet or budgie or something. If you look at the heads, they're very similar in structure. But then on the one on the right, you can see some different silhouettes. Normally you're not going to see them in black like this. They'll be, either light or dark colored or whatever. But that kind of just gives you an example of what a silhouette might look like on some of the different groups of raptors.
For some people, it's easier to start out with things like this and not focus on the patterns and colors. So if that's the way you work, then that's great. It's a way for you to begin starting to narrow down what it is you're looking at.
Okay, here's a group of birds that everybody should be maybe familiar with this particular bird. It's a species of plover called a killdeer. Very common, very abundant in Kansas, but you may see something that looks fairly similar, like this bird. That's not a killdeer. It is related. It is a plover. Go ahead and pop the other ones up, Jen, if you would. So all four of these are plovers. Top right or top left is a killdeer, obviously the very common one. The one on the top right is called a semi-palmated plover. You'll notice it only has one neck band instead of two. It has yellowish legs, dark back, sort of like the same color as a killdeer. Has that little bicolored bill. One on the bottom left is actually a piping plover, which is an endangered species. The color and the legs doesn't look exactly like it should. Those should be a little bit more orange or yellow. Again, single band. And then the one on the bottom right is a snowy plover, a threatened species in Kansas that has dark legs, dark bill, and does not have a full neck band. Now, this time of year, if you would happen to see a piping plover or even a semi-palmated plover, sometimes they don't have complete neck bands. They do a change in plumage, so it's a little bit different this time of year. Go ahead.
So, and I'll just point out really quickly too, part of the reason the color's not great on the piping plover is because it's wearing jewelry. As he said, this is an endangered species. So a lot of the endangered bird species, you'll see them out in the wild with leg bands. So they've been captured by scientists that are trying to track them.
Now here's a group that everyone loves. Everybody that beginning bird watcher, they're all beginning bird watchers love sparrows, right?
LBJs.
Probably not so much. The one on the top left is one that everybody should be familiar with. It's a house sparrow. They're not really related to the sparrows very closely that we have that are wild here. This is one that was brought over from Europe and is naturalized here, and obviously is very abundant, very in towns, yards, things like that. There's another species that we have that looks fairly similar. That's called a Harris's sparrow. And this bird nests in the Arctic, and we're lucky enough in the center part of the US to have them wintering here. So common in shelter belts and fields and places like that. They will come to backyard feeders in smaller towns. And what you need to look at is that's actually an adult male. So if you pop the other photos up, Jen, this is either a female or an immature Harris's sparrow on the bottom left. So you see it does look somewhat different than the male. And then the bird on the bottom right is actually a female house sparrow. So that's the female of the species that's in the photograph on the top left. So you have to learn some of the different plumages, what they look like. Harris's sparrows in the spring before they migrate, usually in April or so, are going to look like this really nice, color and coloration and stuff on that bird on the top left or top right, where they show up later. The females and immatures will look, like the one on the bottom left. So anyway.
All right. And then we've got a little video that we wanted to share about the Kansas Birding Trail. Let me get this laser pointer off here.
Yeah, while she's getting that set up.
My name is Malcolm Gold. I live in Kansas City area with my family. I grew up on a small farm. Grandparents loved looking at feeder birds. I grew up hunting, fishing, camping, everything outdoors. And I got into birding about 15 years ago when my daughter was born. For some people, it's watching the birds out their backyard and having a hummingbird coming into a feeder. For me, it's kind of what we would consider field birding, where you get out in nature as much as you can and you identify and see as many species as you can, whether it's visual or hearing them. And sometimes it's going out at night, sometimes it's early morning, sometimes it's great weather, sometimes it's bad weather. When you love something, you kind of do it all year round. Birding in Kansas kind of looks like the different seasons. So if you're in an urban environment or if you're in a rural environment, whether you're on the tallgrass prairie or if you're at a National Wildlife Refuge. Maybe you're at Quivira National Wildlife Refuge or at Cheyenne Bottoms Wildlife Area and you're looking at wetlands. Or maybe you're at the Tallgrass National Prairie and looking through the Flint Hills. Or you're down in southeast Kansas and you're looking at the Osage cuestas and the hardwood forests of that habitat. Birds are going to be a little bit different in each of the different locations. So the opportunities are really as limited as what your curiosity is, as much as you're willing to travel, realistically as limited by your time. We have the east and the west. On the eastern part of the state, we get most of the migrants that come through there, the warblers, like that Blackburnian warbler. But then on the western part of the state, you actually get the western migrants coming through as well. So you have this best of both worlds in east and west. You don't have either one in huge, great numbers, but you have a bigger diversity than if you had been a couple states to the east or the west. And you have some unique birds that are present in great numbers in Kansas that aren't present anywhere else. The biggest population of lesser prairie chickens is in western Kansas. And that's actually been an area of ecotourism in recent years. It's a dwindling population, often driven because of habitat loss. And if you want to see lesser prairie chickens on boom, Kansas is a great place to come in spring. In winter, we have an amazing number of overwintering sparrows. In summer, we're on the northern edge for breeding populations for black rail. So anyone in the east, they're like, oh, you have a Harris sparrow. I'm like, oh, you should come to Kansas because in winter, everywhere you go, there's Harris sparrows. All those birds are awesome. Kansas is kind of this hodgepodge of everything, and each of the little nuggets by themselves, where it's a different specific habitat or the different trails, offer cool opportunities. So if you had to pick a certain time of year that birders generally like more than others, it's spring migration. It's when the males are in their breeding plumage, they're as bright as possible, they're singing to try to get on breeding territories. But really, you can bird year round, and there's awesome things to find all year. The Kansas Ornithological Society keeps a list of all the official birds ever observed in Kansas, and it's roughly like 480. Some of them are here year round, like red-tailed hawks. Other ones, maybe you're only here for a single day on their migration through. The Kansas birding trails were put together by birding experts and tourism experts that were trying to look at, for anyone coming to the area, where could they actually have a hub city with nice paved trails and paved roads to get from spot to spot, and within a day, where are the best suggested locations year-round for you to go and see birds? Birding is just a wonderful hobby, and the birding community is extremely inclusive, and they're welcoming. They want to get people involved because, I mean, it's a passion that you want to pass on to others. So I'm a big believer in conservation in nature. You know, if we don't have the youth thinking about why it matters to them, future generations probably aren't going to have the same opportunities that we have today.
Anyway, that was a marketing video that we had put together when we started doing this trail. So the web address for that is there in the center, www.ksbirdingtrail.com. There was a couple of links there for or web addresses for the Kansas Ornithological Society and the Audubon Society, and Jen and I's contact information up there. So anyway, if anyone has any questions or whatever, like I said, feel free to unmute yourselves or throw them in the chat or whatever, and Jen and I are willing to try to tackle them for you if you'd like.
Thank you so much, both of you. I'm going to stop the recording so we can do questions.